Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the FX Daily Roundup. And you can see here we've seen quite the sell-off here in NASDAQ, and also you would look at that to be an S&Ps. Here's S&Ps, but that's on a 2-hour chart. We can take a look at the S&Ps here on the 5-minute chart. You can see we've really fallen off the bed here. We actually had been under some trouble, and on the NASDAQ, we had tried to rally back towards the same day and 2-day VWAP because I had a limit order there and missed that. I did do a little chasing down here, but not of any real subsequence. But Mnuchin, we did get a little bit of a little rally when they said they're having talks, him and Pelosi. But then Mnuchin said it's going to be very difficult to get anything done, which is just really reality. And that really lost any bids and really turned the bids into straight up offers. And you've seen that as we've pushed and pressed them lower in here and pressed even beyond support. I shared this in the chat room. We had this 30-minute chart, trendline support coming in at 11,990. But once again, once you hit something like that, where a lot of this we talked about was built on initially with the stimulus, and we said, that's not really going to be there. But a lot of it's already based on the, we talked about this in the Euro webinar, was that, a lot of this is still hanging around here because it thought that unlikely that we would have a contested election or one that would be necessarily viable, and that we'll see a much bigger stimulus. But that much bigger stimulus will be for later. And once again, once Mnuchin came out and said, hey, it's going to be just very difficult to get it done, which is true, then we were already on the offer. We talked about this in the European crossover webinar about, hey, we're already past the Apple event. We're already into Amazon Prime Day. Don't see how these can start to rally. We talked about Apple. There's not a whole lot we can rally up from. And we ran out of gas right there at 123, and we kind of held there. But once again, once everything started to sell off, and Amazon has been weak all day long. It's just been a constant drip. We've covered that. We can touch on that real quick before we get into FX. Bear with me. And I talked about this in the chat room. You can see here, it's just been on a constant drip. There was no gains. We did see a jump this morning in Netflix. I saw it actually came across on Twitter. I don't know which brokerage firm it is, I forgot, but we were trading like at 545. It was dead in the water, and all of a sudden it jumped $10. And you can see here that then we extended beyond those gains, and then we expanded even further. That got us a little bit into the bid this morning. When we opened up in the cash equities, I actually sold the futures and caught that on the way down. But I said, watch it. Apple's getting some bids, and sure enough, I didn't get long, probably should have, but we saw the NQ come back rather nicely on that run. But throughout the whole time, you can see here, Amazon's just been weaker. And Amazon was one of the runs, obviously, with Apple yesterday since this last week, that's really been pushing much higher and higher and higher. We talked about that. And we saw Tesla kind of take off too. Netflix had held up, but then it started to succumb to the selling, as did Facebook. And Facebook is a pretty good, we've talked about that in the past. It's a good leader. Even it's one of those, just like the way NVIDIA is, and actually I'd say probably more so now than NVIDIA, is that as long as this if it starts leading, it kind of holds the whole thing up. I don't know why it is, but it'll hold. Microsoft was also doing pretty well in the morning. We could go and take a look there. But, one of the reasons I like to follow the individual equities, I saw levels that in the NQ said, wow, that looks like support. And this area looks like support. Just right now, when I was saying 11,927, that's a good little support. We are at 11,942 right now. But I'll tell you what, in the cash right here in the individual equities, we were still moving lower. And so that's why I like to go and follow those individual equities. They give you a lot more than just the levels on NQ. Levels on NQ, they can tell us, well, this is about where we can look at a risk level or whatever, but it's these guys individually, obviously, that make that index that really have more weight when you see a market that still remains under pressure and you say, hey, wait a minute, they're still leaning on, of course, in a situation where they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, then you know that you don't want to step in front of it. Actually, you can just join it. I did join it, but not as much as I would have liked to have got. Irina says, yes, I sold some of my position in Amazon and PayPal Do you believe it's a correction? Yeah, I mean, and we talked about that this morning. I told you we talked about Irina was here in the European crossover webinar, and let me see, are we still on the Amazon page? Hold on a moment. Make sure we're still on that. No, we're not. Let's go to the Amazon. Yeah, and I told you that it just didn't look that good from up here. You know, it's just kind of like flat the whole time. While I'll give you an example. While Microsoft, and we'll take a look at that, and that would even continue to move higher. We're still kind of pushing higher. You see them here? Eventually we did roll over, but you know, once again, like, and Apple was just sitting here, bump on a log, and then we started moving. I said, hey, look, and matter of fact, when I shared on the cash open, I said, Apple's finding bids. We started moving hard. I said the resistance is going to be 123. When we hit 123 is right when we hit the high in NASDAQ futures. And then we sold off, and I was able to go and get short from there, but we sold off as soon. I mean, they were looking at that resistance area here in Apple. And but like I said, some of the others were kind of holding up relatively okay. Google's holding up relatively okay. But like I said, once the selling hit, you can see this trend line. And it wasn't until we got almost down here, that's when the selling stopped in NQ. So, I mean, I was looking at levels like, oh, wow, they're probably going to pause around 11,990, I said. And we did pause a little bit, but then, and actually I even got long as it dipped down there for a quick little scalp. Fortunately, I didn't stick around very long. But then we took this dip, and I caught a little bit of that. But the thing is that we were, even though we were seeing levels, like as we came into 11,927, the cash was still going lower. So I'm like, oh, well, it can still keep going lower. Obviously, when you get in a direction like that, you don't want to get in the way with it until basically they emptied out all the coffers. Then you can look and see if you see any kind of turnarounds. I was saying, hey, there's some bids coming in, kind of was settling things down. We did finally move a little bit higher. Looks like we made it to about 11,950. We've been as low as 11,900. But once again, nothing that you'd like to go on and necessarily jump in. With that, we'll go and take a look at FX. And we talked about this yesterday. We talked about this in the Euro crossover webinar. And I had 1752 yesterday, and we went past that. But this daily level is sitting there, and we opened the door in case we wanted to test a little bit lower. Obviously, it didn't press any lower, but that 1732. But one market or one pair that was a big mover was the pound, and we'll take a look at that. Look at that. We came into this 2678 or 2878 here. I think we had that as our bias chart. I'd have to take a look. I think it may have been our bias chart resistance. Support. Let me see here. Yeah, that's it, 2878. So we had it here at 2878 for our bias chart support. It's nothing good on me or anything. It's just that I just go with the levels, and I try and just see where can they go to where I see the most touches. Obviously, it didn't happen today with Euro, but I mean, you can see where those touches were, and we found that support there, and we kind of took off, and boy, did this thing take off. I don't think we had the resistance. We had the resistance at 29.79, and we blew past this. And you can see where they ran out again. See the touches on the body right there, which is 30.63, and the high today was 36. Looks like 30.65. So right there on that body touch, 30.63, and looks like the high was 30.63 or 30.65. We'll take a look at the Aussie dollar. So it's nothing magical that I do or any analysis from using different things other than I do use some Fibonacci when it's a big move. When it comes to FX, I just look where all the bodies are and where the touches and where they can logically move to. That's it. But we did go in and close at the 71.59. We kind of held there yesterday. And look, we haven't pressed any lower. We did have the bias chart support a little bit lower. Nothing happening there. We'll take a look at the NAS Kiwi, and then we'll move on to the dollar CAD in light of the sell-off we've seen in equities. Dollar CAD did move it here to 66.83. That is our bias chart resistance. And once again, it's nothing great. It's just that I'm just going where the body touches are and where's the logical move where we can see volume. And like I said, the bias chart is not necessarily meant to say that will be the high, that will be that bottom, but it's an area which sometimes it does play into that, where I see that there will be some good fighting going on. So if you're rallying it, I would expect some selling, because look, you got the body touch here, you got what you would call a wick touch, another wick touch here, overshot a little bit, another wick touch on the upside. So that 66.83 makes a lot of sense, and that's where they ran out of gas. Let's go and take a look at the dollar CAD. Well, we haven't done a whole lot. I mean, we held at this 31.12. We've defended it, but despite the sell-off we've seen in equities, not really a whole lot happening here in this market to speak of. Here in the dollar CAD, we'll go and take a look at the peso. Same thing here, not a whole lot of movement. I pushed up a little bit higher, but things are relatively quiet. And then let's go and move into the dollar yen. We took that dip. I think today we actually gave it a little bit more room. I think we had 508 yesterday, and today we put 516, but it did dip lower. It went as low as 503, and we're really in a weak situation right now. And then to move on to the cash dollar index, you think we'd have a better move than what we're seeing here. We have 93.87. We're just going with the levels of resistance, and this does not look good. I mean, we should be moving higher considering the sell-off we saw in equities, and we're just not doing it. It just looks weak. And one of the thoughts is they're kind of like sitting back because they think, we're going to get this big stimulus. Not at this time, but eventually later. I was just looking at something on Twitter about the SCOTUS hearings. And that's that there. We can go back to the indices. And to get a little bit better perspective, let's go into the 2-hour chart. So you can see here we've come down to 11,927. That's not unusual for to see an overshoot, because once again you get in a situation where they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. One of the things we talked about yesterday, we said, or even this morning on the European crossover webinar, so far we haven't had a correction because this is just a consolidation. Today, now we've got a semblance of a correction. We'll have to see how the market plays out from there. But yeah, this 927 is a good level here. We did overshoot it. That's not a surprise. But maybe we can start to settle ourselves down. And then resistance on the upside will be right there. You see the body touch there? 12,039 would be resistance. There'd be some here, but 12,039 on that body touch here. You see that? 12,039 would be what you'd be looking for. So, and those that want to trade the Dow, we haven't pulled back as much. Look how this Dow's been sitting there like a bump on a log. We finally dropped down, but support would come in right there. You see that? It looks like it almost made it there, which is 28,337. And then looking at the SPOOs, right there. I almost made it there, 3470. But NASDAQ's been the big mover. Well, that's what we have for today. Thanks for joining us here on the Daily Roundup, and we'll see you at the European Crossover webinar tomorrow.